The clock has not yet struck 5 in the morning, and the streets of Manchester are already stirring. Through the thick fog that clings to the cobblestones like a living thing, shadows begin to move. They are not ghosts, though they might appear so in the dim gaslight. They are people. Men, women, and children, wrapped in thin shawls and worn jackets, their faces still creased with sleep, their eyes already heavy with the knowledge of what awaits them. This is the dawn of industrial Britain, where the great cotton mills stand like cathedrals of smoke and steam, and where thousands upon thousands of souls surrender their daylight hours to the machinery that built an empire. Today we walk beside them. Today we live as they lived. Her name is Mary, though it could be Sarah or Elizabeth or Anne. Thousands shared her fate, and thousands more would follow. She is 14 years old, though her hands are those of someone much older, calloused and scarred from years of work. Mary has been in the factory since she was 9. This morning, like every morning, she wakes in the darkness of a rented room she shares with her mother, 2 younger brothers, and another family of 4. The room measures 12 feet by 10. There is no window. The air is thick with the breath of sleepers and the damp smell of unwashed bodies and mildew. Her mother is already awake, trying to coax life into the dying embers of last night's fire. There will be no breakfast, not yet. Perhaps a piece of bread later, if the day goes well. Mary dresses in the dark, pulling on the same gray dress she wore yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. It is stained with oil and dust from the factory floor. She wraps a thin shawl around her shoulders. October has arrived, and the cold has begun to creep through the walls. Outside, the streets are filling with workers, all moving in the same direction, all answering the same call. The factory bell has not yet rung, but it will, and God help anyone who is late. Mary walks quickly, her wooden clogs clicking against the stones. Around her, the city is transforming. Manchester, once a market town, has become something else entirely. Something unprecedented in human history. The factories rise on every side, their chimneys pumping black smoke into the sky, their windows glowing with the light of gas lamps and furnaces. This is the age of cotton, the age of coal, the age when Britain spins thread and weaves cloth for the entire world. She reaches the mill just as the bell begins its harsh, metallic cry. The sound cuts through the morning air like a knife. Workers surge through the gates, a river of humanity, pouring into the mouth of the beast. The mill is enormous, 5 stories of red brick and iron, its walls vibrating with the power of the engines within. Mary joins the stream, pressing through the narrow doorway, past the overlooker who watches with sharp eyes for anyone who dares arrive even seconds late. The penalty for lateness is a fine, sometimes an hour's wages, sometimes more. For a family surviving on 7 or 8 shillings a week, such a loss can mean the difference between eating and hunger. Inside, the noise is beyond anything the modern world can imagine. It is not merely loud. It is a physical presence, a crushing wall of sound that pounds against the skull and chest. Hundreds of power looms clatter and bang in a rhythm that never stops, never pauses, never shows mercy. The machinery is driven by a great steam engine in the basement, its power transmitted through a maze of belts and gears and spinning shafts that run the length of the building. The air is hot and thick, deliberately kept humid to prevent the cotton threads from breaking. Particles of cotton dust float everywhere, catching in the throat and lungs, creating a permanent fog that dims the gas lamps overhead. Mary can barely see from one end of the room to the other. She can barely hear her own thoughts. Her station is in the spinning room, where she works as a piecer. Her job is to move between the spinning mules, watching for threads that break, and when they do, to piece them back together with her small, nimble fingers. It sounds simple. It is not. The spinning mule is a machine over 30 feet long, containing more than 1,000 threads, each spinning at tremendous speed. When a thread breaks, Mary must reach between the moving parts, tie the ends together, and get her hands clear before the carriage returns. Many have failed. Mary has seen fingers crushed, hands mangled, entire arms drawn into the machinery. Just last month, a boy named Thomas, barely 12 years old, was killed when his clothing caught in a belt. The machinery was stopped for 15 minutes while his body was removed. Then it started again. Mary works bent over, constantly moving, constantly watching. The overseer walks behind the rows of machines, watching the workers. He carries a strap in his hand. Any sign of slowness, any moment of rest, and it comes down across shoulders or backs. Children are especially vulnerable. They are paid less, sometimes only 2 or 3 shillings a week, and they are easier to intimidate. Mary has felt the strap before. She bears its marks still. But she has learned to be quick, to anticipate the breaks, to keep her hands moving, even when exhaustion makes her fingers tremble. Around her, others do the same. There is no conversation. The noise makes it impossible. There is only the work and the machines and the endless grinding hours. Time moves strangely in the mill. Without windows, without natural light, the workers lose all sense of the world outside. Morning becomes afternoon, becomes evening, marked only by the brief pauses when the machinery stops for breaks. At 8 o'clock, the engines slow. Workers stumble toward the doors for breakfast, 15 minutes to gulp down whatever food they have brought. Mary eats her piece of dry bread standing in the yard, too tired to move further. Her legs ache, her back aches. Her fingers are bleeding from a thread that cut her an hour ago. She is not alone. Around her, workers sit or lean against walls, their faces gray with dust, their eyes hollow. Some are coughing, deep rattling coughs that speak of lungs damaged by years of breathing cotton fibers. Some will not live to see 30. Some will not live to see 20. The whistle blows. 15 minutes have passed. Back inside, back to the machines. The rhythm resumes, that terrible, pounding rhythm that will not stop until evening. Mary's world narrows to the space around her station, to the threads that must be watched, the breaks that must be mended. Hours pass. Her stomach cramps with hunger. At noon, there is another break, 30 minutes this time. Some workers have brought potatoes or porridge. Mary has nothing. She drinks water from the pump in the yard and returns to her post. The afternoon is the hardest time. Fatigue settles into her bones like lead. Her vision blurs. Her hands move by instinct now, by habit burned into muscle and nerve. She has seen workers fall asleep, standing up, swaying on their feet until the strap wakes them. This is the reality of industrial Britain in its full power. The factories of Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, and Glasgow produce wealth beyond the dreams of previous generations. Cotton cloth floods the markets of Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Fortunes are made. Grand houses are built. But the wealth flows upward into the hands of the mill owners, the merchants, the investors who never set foot on the factory floor. For Mary and the thousands like her, there is only this: 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, for wages that barely cover rent and bread. There is no safety net, no insurance, no protection. If you are injured, you are dismissed. If you are sick, you are replaced. If you complain, you are blacklisted, and no other mill will hire you. Yet somehow, life persists. In the cramped rooms and narrow streets of the working districts, communities form. Neighbors help neighbors. Families share what little they have. On Sunday, the one day of rest, the churches fill with workers seeking comfort, seeking meaning, seeking some promise that this suffering has purpose. Reform movements are beginning to stir, voices calling for shorter hours, better conditions, protection for children. But change comes slowly, fought at every step by those who profit from the current system. For now, for Mary and her generation, there is only the daily struggle, the battle to survive one more day, one more week. Evening finally arrives. At 7 o'clock, the engines begin to slow. The terrible noise gradually diminishes, falling from a roar to a rumble to a mechanical sigh. The machines stop. For a moment, the silence is almost painful, as if the ears cannot believe they are no longer under assault. Workers stumble toward the exits, moving like sleepwalkers, their bodies so exhausted that walking requires conscious effort. Mary joins the exodus, flowing out into the darkened streets. It is autumn, and night comes early now. The sun set hours ago, invisible beyond the factory walls. She has not seen daylight since Sunday. The walk home is a blur. Her body moves automatically, following the route it has taken 1,000 times before. Other workers fill the streets, all moving in slow, exhausted currents toward their various homes. The air outside is cold and clean compared to the choking atmosphere of the mill, but Mary barely notices. At home, her mother has managed to prepare a thin soup made from bones bought cheap at the market and whatever vegetables could be afforded. They eat together, the family gathering around their small table, too tired for much conversation. Mary's younger brothers will start in the mill soon, when they are old enough. The family needs every shilling they can earn. After the meal, there is no energy for anything but sleep. Mary lies down on the straw mattress she shares with her brothers, pulling a thin blanket over her body. Her muscles ache. Her hands throb. Tomorrow will be the same as today. And the day after that. And the day after that. 6 days a week, every week, month after month, year after year. This is not a life anyone would choose. This is a life imposed by necessity, by an economic system that treats human beings as components in a vast machine of production. Mary is 14 years old, and she has already forgotten what it feels like to run freely, to play, to dream of a future different from the present. Yet in the darkness, just before sleep takes her, something stirs within. A tiny ember of resilience that refuses to be extinguished. She is still alive. She has survived another day. Tomorrow she will wake again. She will walk to the mill again. She will work again, because that is what human beings do. We endure. We persist. Even in the face of overwhelming hardship, even when the weight of the world presses down upon us, we find the strength to continue. Mary does not know that her generation's suffering will eventually spark reform. She does not know that the factory acts will come, limiting hours, prohibiting the worst abuses, slowly, painfully improving conditions. She does not know that her story will be told and retold as a warning, as a reminder of what happens when profit becomes more important than people. The Victorian factory worker lived in a world we can barely imagine today, a world where childhood was a luxury few could afford, where the rhythms of nature were replaced by the rhythms of machinery, where human life was measured in productivity and profit. They built the modern world with their hands, their sweat, their very lives. They created the wealth that transformed Britain into a global superpower. But they did not share in that wealth. They were the foundation upon which empire was built, and like all foundations, they were buried beneath the weight of what stood above them. As we look back across the decades and centuries that separate us from Mary and her generation, we see both how far we have come and how much remains unchanged. The factories are different now, the machinery more sophisticated, the laws more protective. But around the world, in different forms and different places, people still struggle against systems that value production over humanity. The questions raised by Victorian Britain still echo in our modern world. What do we owe each other? What is the true cost of progress? When we benefit from systems of production, do we bear responsibility for the suffering they cause? Mary could not answer these questions, but perhaps in remembering her, in bearing witness to her life, we come a little closer to understanding what it means to be human in a world that often seems designed to forget.